death is not natural.
Sure.
When God created us, Adam would have been living and living and living if it wasn't for sin. Sin comes into the picture, and with sin comes death. We know that in Romans chapter 5 and verse 12. And so because now death is in the picture, we see that God in his sovereignty, he allows for instances, for things to happen to bring about his will. So his will is at an appointed time we are going to die, and that death, he will allow an instrument to bring about that appointed will. Hi again, and welcome to the Theology Live podcast. This time around, we're looking to chat about something that is very sensitive, something that probably has affected a lot of people.
But before that, aren't you gonna ask me, bro?
Bruh,
See, last episode I asked you,
I'd like to
what's
say,
on your mind? I actually didn't ask you, just told me what's on your mind.
But the problem is, because in our podcast we don't have a script, that's why you jumped the gun.
Okay, sorry.
Because I was
Never
going
mind.
to say, but
Okay.
before we get there, what's on your mind, Pastor?
Okay.
But the pastor clearly it's burning you. And since it's burning you, tell us, Pastor, what's on your mind?
Man, I'm excited. I really am excited to see what God is doing at Central. It's been 2 weeks of baptisms of both at the Hill and Arcadia.
Sure.
When this episode comes out, it would have been 2 weeks before, but four baptisms at the Hill, 11 baptisms at Arcadia, and it is so encouraging.
Sure.
To see God working in hearts, and you know, Jabu, hearing the testimonies and the confessions of faith and all of that. I was just thinking about how it truly is amazing, the work of God, because I was thinking of some churches I know in America. I don't even know in terms of South Africa if some churches do it, but you know that they have this kind of ways of altar call, which is fine. I'm not bashing altar calls, but there is certain ways that churches do in terms of instant baptisms and things like that,
Spontaneous baptisms.
and spontaneous baptisms and all of that, and there are certain criteria or basically I was saying, like, we actually didn't have any of that.
Sure.
I mean, at Central we don't usually do altar calls.
Sure.
And I was even chatting with someone a while back, just like, how you don't do altar calls, you know, like how, almost like, how are people getting saved?
Yes,
you know?
yes.
And so just hearing the testimonies and hearing just discipleship taking place, you know, a couple of the young guys mentioning talks they had with you or youth talks and just the Lord working through the normal means of grace.
Yeah.
And seeing some of these guys even maturing in their faith, it is so encouraging. And so that's what's on my mind. Just heart filled with thanksgiving to God for what He's doing, and it is, and I must emphasize this, and it is not us. It's not about us. All the glory and honor goes to God. He's the one that saved them.
Sure.
And so I'm just rejoicing for them bringing this sheep to the fold, as it were. So yeah, man.
We've in our Wednesday Bible study we working through the book of Philippians, and as before Philippians I was reading through Ephesians, and we worked through it, but not necessarily verse by verse. Last time we were just looking at the topic living as a church, and the book of Ephesians was sort of the backbone to that topic. But then now we're reading through Philippians, and I'm picking up a thread in Paul's writing, in that there's sort of a relationship between churches. And so all of this to say that somebody listening to this, because of the culture we live in, where we're so used to people reporting like baptisms and people reporting number of people that were saved at crusades. 7,000 people were saved, and we're like 8,000 baptisms. Like it's so easy for somebody to listen to this and say, "Oh, they're one of those." But what I don't want you to miss is that churches, even in the New Testament and churches throughout church history, were always encouraged by the work that God is doing in other churches.
Sure.
And so I think that the difficulty is, yes, we do commit to a local church, but we must remember that when God is building his church, he's not building your church.
Sure.
He's building the church, which yours is a physical manifestation of that church. And so your local church meets in a specific location, but it is part of a whole. And so when you listen to this, just thinking of the skeptic who could be listening saying, I know those guys. No.
Yeah.
Listen and be encouraged.
And also, it doesn't happen every Sunday.
No.
And that's like part of the like really rejoicing. There are seasons, and
yes.
I do want to acknowledge that. I don't want to give the impression that we are just trying to boast that this is happening every Sunday.
Sure.
We would love that.
Yes.
We want people to be saved and to take steps of obedience in getting baptized.
Becoming members.
We're not
of the
ashamed
local
of that at all.
No.
But it is just maybe a season of rejoicing because of that.
And it's just an encouragement that God continues to save souls. You listen to those testimonies and you think back of, man, I heard the gospel. Praise the Lord that he opened my eyes to see the beauty of Christ and his work on that cross, that I could respond in faith. And I can also reflect and look at where I am today as a new creature versus where I was back then. And I can look back with gratitude, saying the Lord has brought me thus far. And so praise be to God for saving my soul. And so just talking about life and how far God has brought us, I think, one of the things that ring true is we think we will live forever. We recently had an episode where we were just chatting about, just the realities of cancer. And our elder brother, Tim, was just telling us about how, he came from being so busy and so active and like that. His life got turned upside down, and everything just had changed. And in that episode, he just shares about, his journey in trusting God. But we work at a school here in Pretoria, and we've already done two memorial services for young people who have died, and so often the common consensus is, man, they were gone too soon, because they had died at a young age. And so even when you think of celebrities who have gone before, what trends? The trend is always gone too soon. In fact, this just shows you how we live in a fallen world. When the Queen had died, people then made the joke. People then had made the joke to say she was gone too soon.
Oh, really?
I was like, no.
Yeah.
But
did you see the meme of that movie The Eternals, and then they put like different like the Queen and some of the people that like they seem like they're gonna live forever because they've been like
for so long.
Yeah.
No, I haven't. Sorry. But I think the point is, we are finite creatures. We are mortal creatures, and so we are all going to die one day.
Yeah.
And so the question that we're looking to ask today is, can a person die before their time? And so when we hear of a young person who was going to a party and then they were murdered, were they killed prematurely? Have they died prematurely? Have they gone too soon? And really trying to understand, from the scriptures, like what is the role of God in all of this? There's a passage in Ecclesiastes which sort of adds to the confusion. And in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 15 to 18, it says this: "In my vain life, I have seen everything." Now that sentence should help us in our interpretation of the next few words. But I'll read it again. "In my life, I have seen everything." And then he goes on to say, "There is a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and there's a wicked man who prolongs his life in his evil doing." And so he seems to see a disparity.
Sure.
The righteous person is dying too soon, as it were, but the evil person seems to be living almost forever. Verse 16, he then goes on to say, "Do not be overly righteous. Do not make yourself too wise. Why should you destroy yourself?" And so based on that observation, it's like, hey, why you don't be overly good. Just, be good in moderation. In fact, as I was reading on this, I read there was actually a movement or a teaching on goodness in moderation. So don't try to be overtly good or overtly righteous. Keep it moderate, just for interest's sake. And then verse 17 says this: "Do not be overly wicked, neither be a fool. Why should you die before your time?" We get that phrase, and that's the phrase that seems to be throwing people off in that, but it's in the scriptures. Why does it say that? It seems to be that Solomon is saying that there's a possibility that you die before your time. He ends it in verse 18 by saying, "It is good that you should take hold of this, and from that withhold not your hand. For the one who fears God shall come out from both of them." So the one who fears God will come out from either being overtly righteous or overtly wicked. So what do we do with verse 17?
So I do want to say, Jabu, that maybe before going in more detail with that, maybe on the pastoral side,
Sure.
Humanly speaking, the experience of a death of a loved one, in experience, especially for example with children.
Yes.
I remember one of the toughest funerals I've ever done was I think he was 8 years old, or 12, and it was heartbreaking because it is unnatural.
Sure.
For a mother to bury
Yes.
a young son.
Yeah.
And so I want to maybe start with just acknowledging in a human level, in a human experience, that it is quite heartbreaking and challenging. There were two of my in my previous youth that a couple of years ago, the boy he was in my youth group and his sister were killed in their sleep by gas. They came to disinfect and didn't warn families properly.
Sure.
And it was like a shock. It was like a big shock and heartbreaking. And so I just want to acknowledge that, especially for maybe hearers that have experienced a loved one, especially a child, gone, dying. Just want to acknowledge the pain and the sense of this is not how it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
This is unnatural.
Sure.
to happen. So I just want to acknowledge that before we kind of go a little bit more into the theological side of things.
Yeah. I think the difficulty of a conversation like this is because we live in a fallen world, we're so exposed to tragedy. And I mean things like, I mean, you just shared a horrific tragedy where it's an accident, really. And how do you explain that? How do you explain like a building collapsing or a wall collapsing, or you didn't see something and you tripped and there's we hear a lot of people knocking their heads on the edge of a bathtub. It's like so many tragedies that happen in life that in our finite, limited nature, we can't help but ask the question, God, why is this happening? They were so young. And these things are true. They had so much life ahead of them. They could have done so much with the life ahead of them. And so many people rightfully ask this question. But we also have the other side of it, Isaac, where we live in a world where suicide is a reality. We see people, and we use the phrase taking their own lives. And so we are faced with a situation where that person who has taken their own life, have they taken their own life prematurely? Are they the ones that the writer here is saying that they have died before their time? And so maybe let me try to quickly explain Ecclesiastes, and then we're gonna go on to look at the realities of the sphere or the realm in which God is in control, and how that affects just the rest of our lives. And so I started by reading Ecclesiastes chapter 7 by saying, hold on to verse 15. He says, in my vain life, I have seen everything. He then goes on to talk about what he has observed. So he is describing what he has seen. And so when he says in verse 17, be not overly wicked, neither be a fool. Why should you die before your time? What he's saying there is he has seen those who are wicked, their lives are taken away due to their wickedness. So either in the foolishness of their drunkenness, or they were murdered whilst doing some sinful acts. The writer is basically writing on what he has observed. And so we can also testify. How many young people have been killed at pubs? How many young people have been killed by cars because they were drinking and driving, or they were in a car where the driver was drunk? And so we're seeing there in their wickedness, it says, it seems as though they have died before their time, because they were dying in a very unnatural way. They weren't supposed to be doing that, and because they were doing that, they find themselves being killed. So the Solomon here is basically expressing what we are expressing. Why should you waste your life and die so soon when you could have just kept faithful to God and not pursue wickedness where your life can be taken?
And I think it's, in a sense, it's also a warning in terms of our bodies being temples of the Holy Spirit, for example. So if you uncontrollably eat pizza every day, and it's just like, what you are, in a sense, like killing your body faster, if I can put it like that. And there's a warning in terms of God is saying you shouldn't do that. You know, we gluttony is a sin. And we ought to be good stewards of the body that we are given. We all could do better.
We really could.
I need to run more with Pastor Charles, and just eat less chocolate. And Chido must stop apologizing and giving me chocolate or something. But I think there is a sense of we shouldn't just live lives in a uncontrolled manner that has any disregard for the value of life. we are made in the image of God, and lives have, every human person has a value. And so in the text of being aware of this just wickedness, I don't know the phrase you used there, dying beforehand, I think it's a reminder for us. It's not, you can't live like that.
Sure. I think we can look at it as a warning. We have seen that generally those who drink and drive, they will end up dying in the cars because they are drinking whilst driving. But at the same time, it's not true that everyone who drinks and drives is going to die in a car accident, because there are many who still drink and drive. And so I think it's to be careful to then read this verse as if it was prescriptive, that all those who are overly wicked will die before their time, because there are many old people who have rejected Jesus, and when they share with you the story of their lives, the only thing preventing them from continuing in their sin is access. They're just too old to take themselves to do the things they want to do, but within their hearts they still desire to do those things. And so now we then have to come to then say, so then, can a person die before their time? To answer the question, we have to ask the question, do we all have a set time when we're going to die? So if you're saying that somebody dies before their time, it means that there's a set time for us to be born and a certain time for us to die. And if somebody dies before their time, it means that time that was set was changed. Is that possible?
Can I answer?
You can.
No.
And so I think that there's the difficulty is that God assigns to us a time where we will be born, and so birth, birth at conception. Now listen carefully. Life begins at conception. That there is only by the hand and the grace of God. God gives life. And so when he gives life at that moment, it was at his timing. I make this example often in that, how many families do you know who are, I need to be careful what I say, birds and bees. They're busy with the birds and the bees, hoping to result in children, but it doesn't. Families who they did things the right way. They kept themselves for marriage. They remained pure. They didn't give in to any promiscuity when they were younger. They even kept healthy, so there's no record where they were doing unhealthy things. But they tried for years to have children, and it just doesn't happen. It's because sex is the channel that God uses to bring children into the earth. But it is He's the one who knits the child in the womb. At conception, when the child is formed in the womb, it's God. God decides when that beginning will be. But he doesn't just stop there. He decides the beginning, he keeps them, and then he takes them. And so maybe a passage just to show us here. In Colossians, we know this passage, Colossians chapter 1, verse 15 to 17, we're told this. This is Jesus, is the image of the invisible God. He's the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. Now this is the one, verse 17. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He sustains all things to the point in which he has allotted for them to die. We're going to see in my next passage, the all things there is not just human life, but also all of creation. So when the cow dies, when the tree dies or the leaf falls from the tree, God has ordained all those things. Matthew chapter 10, we read the words of Jesus, verse 29. Are 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Listen to this. And not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. no sparrow. A sparrow is a common bird like a pigeon. None of the street, you know, they call them street specials. They always have like one eye missing and they're walking on one leg.
Streets.
As they are hopping on that one leg, and it's like this thing should have died yesterday. God is keeping that bird alive until the time He has decided for that bird to die. When we say God is in control of all things, friends, He is in control of all things. Now listen to this. Jesus talks about the sparrow, and then in verse 30 he says, but even the hairs on your head are numbered. Fear not, therefore, for you are more valuable than many sparrows. If God knows when a sparrow will die, and then Jesus turns it and says, and you are more valuable than a sparrow, our lives are not an element of chance.
Yeah.
He is in control of every part of our lives. Now, here's the difficulty. Our birth and our death, we all know that they have been assigned by God. In fact, birth and death, we don't know when. That's the truth.
Yeah.
You don't know when you would have been born. God did. In fact, your parents also didn't know. They tried. Some weren't even trying, and oops,